folks. Last time I said I would try to put up an alternative timeline in the history of the compass. I already took a look at the official story of early use of magnetized stones and mentioned the Chinese fish compass. This time we will look at a few examples of antiquity that should throw at least some doubt on the official narrative. This is just a first part of a detour because I wanted to find out if these doubts are based on solid ground. To whoever is new on this channel and comes looking for swastikas, it may be a good idea to go back a few parts first to get a better understanding of what is going on here. I like to keep these videos as short as possible. The oldest sources that speak of the use of magnetized stones is from Mesopotamian clay tablets dated from the 3rd to halfway 2nd millennium BC. In her book Astral Magic in Babylonia, American Assyriologist Erika Reiner identifies lodestones with the same word as to speak. The lodestone itself she identifies as sacred stones of truthfulness. They shall only be touched and worn by wise men. Reiner also connects the word that she identifies as magnet or lodestone to the verb to capture, which is easily associated with the attracting forces of a lodestone. In his studies in ancient technology, Robert Forbes writes about the lack of ore in the Sumerian lowlands of Mesopotamia. This absence causes a backlog in Sumerian industrial development, and this reflects in their language as they use an Assyrian prefix za, Z-A, which means stone, to identify different kinds of ore. The Assyrians from the upper Euphrates had easier access to resources. Heaven metal is clearly meteoric iron. Also interesting is the name given to magnetite, grasping iron ore. But Forbes does not take much risk on literal translations for the lodestone like Reiner does. What Reiner said about the stone of truthfulness makes me conclude that the artisan elite, who would often be magi, were probably the ones who were meant by these wise men. Lodestone must have been considered as a magic stone, at least as long as no scientific explanation was found for its attractive and repulsive behavior. It has long been hypothesized that such stones had a soul, that they were living things, and it was subject of many philosophical contemplation during the ages. Also, their rarity would make them valuable must-haves. I also looked for an explanation for the figures that wear the fish garment represented on Assyrian seals. Why they may be of importance will become clear in a moment. I know there is a lot to do around the resemblance with or possible origins even of the mitre. I wouldn't know about that. The images belong to the period of the Kassites, 2nd millennium BC, and these Kassites were horse lords or of uncertain origin. Some say that they are Indo-Aryans who were in close contact with Indo-Europeans. Though originating from the east, they ruled over a large part of Mesopotamia around 1500 BC, shortly after the fall of the old Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi. In an article called Mischwesen, we can learn that these figures, later adopted by the Assyrians and Achaemenid Persians, were originally 7 sages who lived in an era before the flood. As fish creatures, they came out of the water to teach humans about civilization. At least 8 different fish monsters or creatures developed out of these sages. during the times that followed, Dagon and Uanis being probably the best known. I know little of Mesopotamia or Sumer and its history apart from generalities. I know they traded with the people who lived around the Indus. The many Indus seals found in Mesopotamia have largely proven this long distance trade between the two places. I learned that the members of Meluha society at the outfall of the Indus were sometimes referred to as foreigners by the cultures that surrounded them. It being a major outpost close to the ocean, it is not impossible that the population became mixed over time. I encountered mentions of islands surrounding the outfall inhabited by boat people. Some of these islands disappeared under the ocean, leaving only rags of memory and legend and mythology. When I addressed these particular swastika seals in an earlier episode, I mentioned the work of Mr. Kalyanaraman. He proposes that the archaic Indus script on many of the seals is an encoded means of communication among artisans and traders. With a long distance trade going, such communication using images as a rebus would be most valuable. One understands the glyphs on the seals which accompany a delivery of goods. They speak in rebus of, for example, minerals, alloy, and blacksmiths. I also pointed to the similarities with Rongo-Rongo, the ancient language of the Pacific Islanders. Over 50 different symbols that almost look identical. Yeah, this raises the question of early Pacific trade, does it not? We speak end of the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC. Kalyanaraman calls the Indus or Harappan cultures Sarasvati civilization, named after the river deity, and claims that these people were a well-developed maritime power, shipping in ores from Indonesian mines in the east and providing resources to major cities along the coast of the Indian subcontinent. Lothal, south of Mohenjo-daro, was one of these larger cities, and it thrived on the export of processed shells and mica. It had a large tidal dock more than 4,000 years ago. The Arabian Sea, together with more surrounding land, has been struck by disaster, and these cities have been destroyed or are swallowed up by the ocean. I saw some talk about a meteor that struck the area after breaking up in large chunks. One crater is recently found in South Iraq, on a side note. The arguments for the claims that the trade went westwards all the way to the Mediterranean cultures of the Middle East sounds very convincing to me. To navigate, says Kalyanaraman, they used the fish compass, attributed to the Chinese some 3,000 years later. So let's look at that claim on the fish compass a bit better. The more because he does not stand alone with this, as a growing number of Indian scholars is working towards a necessary international re-evaluation of historical achievements of the Indian people. India, or Bharat as they like to call their ancient kingdom, was a major maritime power in early days. But where most do not go back beyond the great king Asoka, Kalyanaraman puts the use of the compass by the Indians much further into the Bronze Age. He brings up the Macca Yantra, translated as the fish machine, and uses the mythology of an Indian global flood legend as an indirect proof for this claim. Macca is a corruption of Matsya. Nice little reference to the Vesica Pisces on, or the bladder of the fish there. So before I go on, very short on the yugas and the swastika. Some scholars tie the four crooked spokes of the symbol to these four time periods, an explanation which is quite new to me now. I may do something with this info later, I don't know. In between two yugas, there is a short period of turbulence called Yuga Sandhi. This page, among other sources, associates the queer swastika with this time period of turbulence, and it is in such period that Matsya was born. Matsya is found as a tiny fish and kept safe by Manu. Manu is the Hindu version of Utnapishtim of the Epic of Gilgamesh or of the biblical Noah. Once a rapidly growing fish is too large to be able to contain in anything else but the ocean, Manu sets it free. Matsya incarnates into a mermaid version of Vishnu, his first avatar. The deity warns Manu about the upcoming flood and orders him to build a boat and to also gather on it a pair of each animal and a sample of each seed. Then, says Vishnu, the eternal seven sages will come on board of your boat. I will appear as a fish with a horn, and you must tie a rope around it. I will take you to a safer place. When the deluge came, Vishnu, or should I say Vishnu, or even better Matsya, brings him to the mythical Malaya Mountains in safety. The story speaks of a mountain in the north of India, in the Himalaya, but there is actually a Mount Malaya in Sri Lanka as well, commonly known as Adam's Peak. No disrespect meant, by the way, for people's religions. There are so many versions of this flood story. Some speak of 14 floods and 14 forefathers of humanity, all called Manu. What interests me here is the advice that the deity gives to the man. Vishnu refers to 7 sages who will join him on the boat, and these 7 rishis make up the Ursa major constellation. This reference to astronomy and way into safety can easily be interpreted as a hint to safe navigation, using the northern celestial pole and Ursa Major as an orientation point. The snake in the picture, acting here as the rope Manu uses to tie the boat to Matsya, is called Shesha or Sheshnag. He is the king of serpents, more powerful than any other snake. He is the only one who remains after total destruction. He is also the protector of Vishnu, which made me ponder on the significance of such an energy that is symbolized by the snake and magnetism. Either way, Matsya is undeniably connected to a pole, or better, the pole. One would expect a fish to be in the stars. I tried a while back to get a better idea of the northern circumpolar stars of ancient India. I hope to find a connection to the swastika. There are quite a few, but the number of different explanations together with such a number of deities, no. But I will come back to this. First, more about the Macca Yantra or fish machine. The Matsya Purana are gathered and first written down during the first millennium. This literally translates into texts of ancient events of the fish. Some sources say it was written down during the deluge, and they contain some of the earliest writings on Vastu Shastu or Vedic architecture, a collection called Brihat Samhita. The practice of sacred architecture is still in use nowadays, and a Vastu consultant will always carry a compass with him. Little is generally known by outsiders or Westerners about the art of Vastu, and the origins and similarities between Vastu architecture and the Chinese equivalent, Feng Shui, are still heavily debated, Of course, many Indian historians and researchers are convinced that the practice did not travel from China into India, but the other way around. And they may have good reasons for this claim. China had the habit of sending scholars to the Indian universities and monasteries. They returned with either copies, but often with the original texts. Indian scholars who were sent to the Chinese courts became Chinized over time. Their statues bear Chinese names, revealing their true origins. I found no reference to the use of a compass similar to the Feng Shui spoon compass in Vastu architecture. The yantra that is in use nowadays serves to overcome mistakes that were made during construction and that go against Vastu laws. It is absolutely not certain that the symbology on the yantra that is related to the use of such a compass or a fish machine like the Indian compasses were called. Maybe it is all a coincidence. Impossible also to say when and where the spoon replaced the fish or what happened there, but it is probably a very old practice in which we can still sense traces of the naturalist approach to science, a more holistic way of living in which the quote, "as above, so below," is profoundly present in daily life. One source mentions the alignment of ruins of the 3,500-year-old Chinese Shang dynasty being oriented to the magnetic north, slightly off true north. For some, an indication that the Chinese performed this practice of orientation in their architecture at least 2,000 years prior to the official dating. During the Shang period, who overthrew the first imperial Jia dynasty and on their turn were succeeded by the Zhou, industrialized bronze casting, the calendar, writing, etc. were developed. The invention of a magnetic compass of some sort, that sounds plausible enough. That does not automatically mean that these people all used a compass to navigate, and certainly not the seas where they had nothing of interest at that stage in time. But that was not the case with the Sarasvati or Indus civilization of that era. I am going to leave it here for today, working on more fish to post soon. Thanks very much for watching, of course. Bye bye.